So this next place that we're going to see, I can't wait. What drives me about taking a certain picture of a certain thing that just pops up in front of me is, I think a lot of it has to do with, and it all happens at once, and I think it's kind of subconscious, is that it's this blending of, I have to capture the history of this place, I have to capture the soul, composition, all of a sudden lighting, everything just seems to just like go bing. My name is Jack Faulkner. I live in Ferndale, Washington, and I live here with my wife, Elaine.
Jackson's art is really about places that are falling apart. Order has become chaos. He looks at the different pieces and he puts his compositions together so they're actually attractive, which is really interesting.
I'm an entropic archivist, and entropy is the eventual dissolution and dissolving of everything that exists down to basic dust. And I like to preserve all of the history that is actually dissolving before our very eyes before it's all gone. Growing up in Detroit, my mother was a photographer, and she always had a camera, and it was always a 35mm rangefinder, a Yashica. And when I was about 10 years old, she gave it to me because she was upgrading to a Nikon. And I began taking pictures of architecture. I've always loved architecture. But, and it was interesting because we lived through the race riots in Detroit in 1968. And it was very interesting to be able to take some pictures of some of that scenery and also of some of the areas where strife happened, and it made an impact on me. My day job is working for the city of Everson, Washington, a small little municipality, and I'm their building official. So I do everything related to buildings. I do everything from plans review to building inspection.
I'm a drug and alcohol counselor. It's actually called a substance abuse professional. I got started after the kids. I had 3 kids, so I went back to school. I was fortunate enough to go to the Native American school. And I was able to get my credentials.
One of my main focuses that I want to preserve is our rural history. And I'm very concerned that most people that are young in age don't have any idea of just the sacrifices that the generations before them did in order for us to enjoy what we're having today. That's why I like to find all of the available farm sites that are still there, that still show the work and the effort that these people had put into creating a place for their families and their future generations to live in.
Fortunately for Jack, I love to go out in rural areas. I just love being out in the middle of nowhere, which is where he typically finds his places to photograph. And it helps him a lot because safety reasons, I'm there available to help him in case he gets into trouble.
When I approach a site that I've never been to before, I always assess it kind of actually from my profession as a building inspector. because most of these places that I go into are over 100 years old and structurally are sketchy at best.
There are numerous ways to get into trouble because there's rattlesnakes there. There's always concern when you're going into places that are abandoned like that. We're kind of a team together to do that, and he is very fortunate that I like to go where he likes to go.
When I start going into them, I check for any kind of structural issues that I think are going to prevent me from going upstairs, things like that. We actually did have a person that actually tragically died when he was on one of the sites in Canada, and he actually fell into a very small well that was only 36 inch in diameter, and he died. So I'm well aware of the dangers that are involved in this, and especially those are just the structural dangers. Then we're not even talking about rattlesnakes and all of the other things that I've, tangled with over the years. One of the other aspects that I like in my photography to find is the aspect of transportation and all of the different modes that I find when I go to these locations. It could be factory buildings that have machinery that are still in them. It could be the vehicles that farmers used. It could be their cars that they went to Sunday church in. There's all different types of vehicles, transportation modes that I find, and many of them have got a character to them that I love to capture, because some people loved the vehicles that they had, and you can tell because they held them with high esteem. Even when they died, they pushed them out behind a building and left them there. They couldn't bear to part with them. And other ones I've found down in the junkyard gullies and ditches where they hated those pieces of machinery and they didn't want to see them anymore. I really like to shoot on the east side of Washington State for a couple of reasons. One of them is primarily we don't have as much decay over there. We've got really hot summers. We don't have as much rain, and everything stays in a preserved state of decay, which is just perfect for me. And a lot of the history that's over 100 years old over there, they have a lot of respect for it. I really believe that the abandoned homesteads and the machinery that they leave behind are more of like a cemetery and tombstones to the forefathers. So they respect them and they leave them there. If they have a field that they're actually planting all around it with wheat, if there's an existing farmstead there, they're going to leave it and they're going to respect it. And so then I can just walk right up there and do the same amount of respect with my camera. And on the west side of the state of Washington, it has a whole different feeling. It's definitely much more, by nature, green. So a lot of my images and stuff are darker. They have a lot more dripping atmosphere to them because we have dripping atmosphere here. And so it's a whole different feeling. There's a much more of a sense of nature taking over here. And there's a lot more rot, a lot more decay. You see a lot more new life springing up in the old life that's dying. specifically on vehicles. I'll have whole ecosystems that are regenerating themselves on chrome trim from Detroit, on some old hunker from the 1950s that you wouldn't get over on the east side of Washington State. One of the other aspects that I like to focus on is industrial architecture and the leftover remnants of a lot of our great cities that, through their own way of doing things or not doing things, have been left to ruin. I love seeing the creativity of all of the engineers, all of the scientists, and all of the laborers that built these edifices that are now just sitting there crumbling, and I want to preserve those as well. What I love is that it doesn't matter where we're at, but it always seems to be when we're on a very focused photo shoot somewhere, there'll be an indicator that Jake, my son, is still around us. And it'll be like out in the middle of nowhere. And a dragonfly has been a really prominent thing for the past 3 years that it just seems to symbolize a lot of things. And we'll be out in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden this dragonfly will just come hopping down and literally will pace our car. It will stay right with us for about 25, 30, 40, 50 feet, and then it'll just wing off. And I just feel like, damn, he's just right there with us. And it's such a special moment. And there'll be other things where I'll be inside a place or something, and all of a sudden I'll just feel his presence, and I'll hear him say something like, "That's a great shot, Pops." It's like, thanks, bud. It's pretty amazing.
Jacob was our middle child. He had an older sister and a younger sister, and he surprised all of us by growing and growing and growing, and ended up being 6'5". Here's a picture of him with his dad. We're both about 5'9", so it was a complete surprise that he grew to the height he did, and he just grew into this wonderful, big-hearted, lovable character. We got the call at about 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday night, July 23rd, 2017, and we got the call that he was found deceased, and he had been living in some of our friend's basement apartment. It turned out that he accidentally overdosed. P just called us and told us that he was dead, and we had to go down to Bellingham immediately, and he was very distraught. And, that was just like, a dagger in the heart. It was horrible, and I can't even really put it into words. It was awful. And so we went down there, and the police were called because it's a crime scene is what it is, and they were investigating. And so Jackson and I and Pete and Delia sat on the porch of their house while the police were examining his room, and they told us they didn't find a note. They just found the pills. He had a prescription that he had gotten like 6 days before of Xanax, and he combined substances and passed away.
When my son Jacob passed away, obviously our lives changed overnight and went from order to chaos and to despair. I was very grateful that I had my photography because it was a lifeline for me. It was only about a year before he passed away that I actually started taking pictures that meant so much to me about, ironically enough, losing things. And so I was very grateful to have that photography there to see me through the pain and the loss. I could still do it with images of buildings and cars and vehicles and use them as a metaphor for the loss of my son.
Jackson and I have very different grief. It's kind of like a Venn diagram. He has his grief and I have mine, and then we do overlap. So we have that shared experience, but the rest of it, is you feel very alone in it. Jack has really taught me how to be more creative, though, and really focus on creative efforts in order to process the grief.
That I've been fortunate enough to be able to publicly speak at some presentations in libraries. And my photography has really touched a lot of people. They come up to me afterwards and they say, I never looked at a building and could really think about when I lost my mom or lost my dad, but through your photography, it's really helped him. So
I was able to participate in a book called The Grief Diaries. It does have our personal story in it. I wrote it the whole first year after Jake was gone. Jack has a very healthy way of dealing with his grief. He processes his grief through the photos that he does and his posting twice a day on Instagram.
I'm always looking for an object around the central image to be the frame for it. So when rain hits old rusty metal, it turns it into this rich copper color. So any kind of moisture just totally darkens it, and it almost looks like it turns it into chocolate. So naturally, the presence of Jacob is still all around us. And we actually like to honor him each year. We usually like to go out to a local beach that he loved, and we shoot off fireworks.
When Jacob has his Angel Day, that's what we call the anniversary of Jacob's passing. I really like that term. And it is a celebration of him, and it really has turned into a positive family experience.
One thing that I'm just hopeful is that if my photography can help anyone dealing with a loss, and that can be a cat, a dog, a person, a building, whatever they lose, that if I can help them and show them that there still is a way through that pain and that loss, then I think I've done my job.